Drilling fluids touch just about everything in the drilling process. We're here to deconstruct the drilling process and drilling fluid concepts to provide a deeper understanding of our industry. In each episode, we'll share information, talk to interesting people, and maybe share a few stories along the way. Welcome to the Flowline, a production of AES Drilling Fluids, brought to you by Matt Offenbacher and Justin Gauthier.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Flowline. Back in the studio here, our lovely studio, might I add. Got the blue comfy chairs happening, which is nice. It's a little tight table, but I know it's work in progress.
I know. Everybody stay tuned because it's just going to get better and better.
Well, beggars can't be choosers. From where we've come from, this is more than I could have ever asked. So I'm happy
Yes.
for it.
We're like professionals.
Oh, it's getting there. How's things, Matt? I know last time... Sounds like you and Josh had a great episode. I started listening to it, but then I got cut off doing something. I haven't finished it, but what a wealth of knowledge that guy, man, every time.
I mean, it's just fun to hear from him because he's always got he looks at it from a different angle. He's definitely a student of history. He has sort of these theses that he tests out. And so just about any question I ask him, he'll come back with something that's way more detailed than I could have imagined.
Yeah.
Or he'll even I question your question, and you're like, oh, that's actually you're way more precise than I was on that. So
yeah,
I always learn a lot. I'm glad he came on. I mean, he happened to be here. He's like, you want to record? I was like, I guess. And
yeah,
no,
that's great. And I couldn't quite tell. But was he wearing one of our AES ties?
Yeah. Well, he came by, and we just wanted to hear what he had to say about the tariff stuff, right? And
yeah.
Then it was like, well, how do we say, okay, we'll bring some food in. And then it was like, we got any swag? And he was wearing a suit. We were like, well, you need a tie for that, kind of joking, because we all wore AES ties at the AADE conference.
Which is cool, yeah.
And so anyways, yeah, he's like, well, then I'll put one on, so.
I thought I could tell it was the black and blue one, and I was like, wait, is he wearing an AES tie for the interview? This is great. He came full swing, ready to roll. No, that's awesome. But big shout out to Josh Young. If you don't follow him on X or even LinkedIn, be sure to follow him. He's just a wealth of knowledge if you're interested in energy markets and what's going on in the world of oil and gas from a very commodity and price perspective. He's super dialed in and just all things energy. But with that being said, Matt, got a great episode today and one that just hits home. I mean, with how much emphasis is put on a lot of water-based mud drilling right now, in certain areas. Let's talk about cheesing, Matt. But before we start talking about cheesing, and it just rung a bell, when it comes to eating cheese, Matt, are you a big cheese guy?
I'm not. So one, doctor said you shouldn't be eating a bunch of cheese. But I enjoy some good cheese. I'm not around it a lot. We'll put it that way. My kids eat it all. The cheese sticks.
Kids love cheese. I don't know if it's the texture or what, but kids normally the crushed cheese.
Yeah.
It's something about dairy in general. I think kids just like dairy until it gives them super, issues with digestion. Another topic for another day. My favorite cheese is brie. And you melt it on some crackers.
Brie with...
Oh, buddy, that and some garlic,
a little jam on that or something.
Yes, a little fruit spread or jam. The jam, the brie, a little vino too if you're at it. It just is great. And then besides that, I'll eat most cheeses. But that is, if I had to pick one cheese that I could eat, that would be it. But again, can't eat a lot of cheese because it disrupts the digestion, if you will, which is never good.
But if you do, enjoy it with a nice baked brie.
Yeah. Exactly. But anyway, moving on, but staying on the cheese topic, when it comes to lubricants, if anyone ever has been on a job or has been part of a lubricant job on a rig, you always hate to hear the word cheesing because it can put certainly a wreck in your day. So let's talk about lubricants and cheesing and really just kind of double clicking on, the why and how it actually happens, which, is extremely important, especially when designing lubricants.
Yeah, so lubricants will do these things called cheesing and greasing. Keep in mind, a lubricant is trying to form a film on surfaces, right? That's how we get our lubricity. But there's all kinds of other stuff going on in the fluid. So it could be that your alkalinities are out of whack. It could be there's a lot of cations in the fluid. And so depending on the type and chemistry of the lubricant, it can behave in certain ways. And And so cheesing normally is it's actually trying to create a little emulsion, except you've got way more water than you have oil. So you get these sort of clumps. And the problem is that means your lubricant starts separating out in these chunks, which blind the screens. They create other issues, and you don't get the lubricity. And greasing is they tend to clabber up with they oil wet solids and clump together. You want a little bit of greasing, like sticking to surfaces, but you get too much and you lose the effect and you have a mess on your hands. But one of the big things, my best illustration, I think the one that I've tried to use more, and best doesn't mean best overall, the best one I can come up with, which there's a ceiling there, but here we go. Imagine you have high hardness or whatever, you have available calcium, magnesium, or, other things that you commonly see either in produced water or hard well water. Um, let's say I use stearic acid as the example. Now, aluminum stearate, we all know is a good defoamer. So that aluminum, Al3+, with that stearic acid, and what happens is it creates a shape. Well, one, it's not water soluble, right? You got to mix it with oil and then apply it.
Yeah.
Right? But it acts as a defoamer. Now, calcium stearate, so we go to calcium stearate, that becomes an emulsifier, so a water in oil emulsifier. Sodium stearate is conventional soap. And one of the interesting things is like soap scum on your shower door or whatever is you're using your soap or whatever and you have hard water, right? Well, the hard water, it interacts with the calcium and magnesium of it from that hard water interacts with the stearic acid, displaces that sodium ion, and it leaves something that is insoluble to water, and it sticks on the side of the glass and makes that nasty stuff, right?
Look at that.
So
The more you know.
But we talk about how we use lime to make an invert emulsion, right? These free fatty acids become calcium soaps. Well, give it some cations. Guess what? Some of these products will want to do that. Same thing with like an elevated pH can create some of those circumstances. But these things all promote a regular lubricant from under normal conditions being fine to under these more stress conditions becoming chunks of cheese or emulsions in water that clabber up and your lubricant gets tied up. So that creates some issues for us.
Yeah, no, it can definitely put a sort of a break on drilling operations if it gets too bad. So,
Yes.
So from there, what kind of options are there to avoid this cheesing phenomenon?
Well, we like to do, I mean, the best, middle of the night phone calls are the ones you never have. And so we normally design our products and we stress them in such a way as to find chemistries that play nicely through your most typical ranges. But that also means we'll make a recommend like, hey, keep the hardness below, 1,000, or we'll say, hey, here are some safe boundaries. And of course, everybody says, sure, whatever, and pushes them. Or we'll get a lot of, what happened here? And we go back and look and say, look, the properties are out of the recommended range. That's something that needs to be addressed. But the best thing you can do, but it can sometimes be expensive, is pick something that just doesn't react that way. The next thing you can do is sort of what I've already alluded to is keep everything in the narrow range, in a range, and maybe narrower for cheaper stuff where you say, hey, your pH shouldn't get above 10, those kinds of things. And that gets hard when you encounter H2S or you have these other, scenarios where you need to run it up. But we, generally we say, okay, keep your ranges, particularly your hardness down. That limits a lot of these, a lot of lubricants are just, we wouldn't recommend them in produced water for that reason. And even so, produced water isn't the same from everywhere. And so like it might work in one and not work in another. But the problem is if I say it works in produced water, somebody's going to take my word for it. And then they're going to run it in produced water until it doesn't work and be mad at me. So, and then the last thing is knowing that you're going to get some of this cheese is you can try and break it up or disperse it. So this might be including some kind of a strong solvent or a surfactant some way to keep it from that emulsion, if it forms, like keep it from clabbering up. And instead of having like chunks, you have little bits that you might not even be able to see. And that strategy seems to work for some folks. But this is where, I think we sort of get crossed, or I get a little uncomfortable with some of the techniques. And it's something that we haven't found a cost-effective means that we're entirely comfortable with to address this. Like, we're very familiar with the chemistry, we're very familiar with ways to do this, but we've generally found it may not be the best for the way we want to handle our business with our customers.
Sure.
So to further elaborate, kind of on the breaking it up, because that's obviously an option as well. What are some things that need to be considered there?
Well, it's going to require some kind of surfactant or strong solvent to help address breaking up or dispersing. And there's a few things here. So one is, some folks will say, hey, I'm just going to try and take advantage of the cheese. Like, let's make the cheese there on purpose and break it up. My concern with that, at least, is that works great in a cationic system. Let's say you're running calcium chloride. Fine. However, let's say you're running in predominantly sodium chloride. We've talked about this in a number of other episodes, the issue with, let's say, your oxygen scavenger, and a lot of elements of your corrosion control program will get neutralized if you run a high hardness natively. So that's one thing, is think about how it affects your other chemicals, because it might not be good. But the other thing is, I would say that the solvents of kind of breaking these things up, what we're seeing a lot of is really strong solvents, which the issue isn't necessarily using a solvent. It is the stuff's kind of nasty, or the stuff that we can afford in the oil field. And so we're seeing in products with really, really low flash points, like ambient temperatures, where we were just kind of surprised because, one, some of those things, yes, low flash, so fire risk, like that's something I'm particularly concerned about. But even the amount of other kind of nasty, potentially carcinogenic materials that are in there, where it's like, hey, normally, like, I wouldn't use this in a drilling operation. And then with the flash point, just think of a place like West Texas where you have very low humidity, where static electricity could easily create a spark that might, result in a flash. This is reasons that we don't use these products. And there are a lot of regulations involving grounding and handling and storage and other considerations that need to be considered if you're going to use a really low flashpoint product. And it may be that the operator or the drilling contractor have policies, and one may be more strict than the other. Obviously, you've got to abide by both.
Yeah.
And I think that it's just one of those, okay, let's make sure everybody understands this. For the most part, what I see is, there's the NFPA diamonds or whatever, and you're like, wow, that looks really flammable from a distance. But then when you review the safety data sheet, which I really want to encourage everybody to do under all circumstances,
Yeah.
you'll look and you'll see a lot of these hazards, and you go into physical properties, and the flash point is really low. I mean, sometimes we've seen below 60 degrees. And I'm not it just makes me uncomfortable, and I feel like it's like, okay, these are tools. I get why you use it, because it works. But like, can we come up with some things that are a little higher flash, less handling concerns, less storage concerns? Because we're not comfortable in that area. And then the other thing is, from the dispersant perspective, this isn't true of all of them, but reviewing the safety data sheets, which whenever somebody says, hey, we've got a great product, we want you to take a look at, or we just are doing our own research, any sample that comes into our lab, we review the safety data sheet, because it's new to us. It may be new to the industry. It may be new to all kinds of things. We found a couple that have, there's one particular chemistry that has a lot of warnings about dangers to reproductive health, like serious implications. And it recommends a lot more PPE than I think we would be accustomed to on a rig, which I think it concerns me because, yes, review the safety data sheet, make sure you got it right. Use all of the proper PPE it recommends and any extra stuff if you're particularly sensitive. But when we develop habits where we're used to, oh, a tote of something requires my rubber boots and these kinds of gloves, and here's another tote, I think people can be easily caught unaware of something that kind of relatively nastier than everything else they handle out there.
Yeah.
So it may be easy to overlook the extra precautions required.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, even in our own lab, there are specifically, some of these components that when they came into our lab, one of them we wanted to look at, we were curious, but we actually only let people who are no longer of childbearing age handle them. I mean, it was that serious. And those are small samples. That's not a tote, that's a jar. So, I guess, when I talk about like the cheating on cheese, if you call it, is yeah, these things work, and they might work better than I even want to believe. Yeah, who knows? But I don't want those in our toolbox, and I would really hope that we as an industry could maybe kind of you know keep raising our game and getting away from some of these things. Just improving the safety profile, and also making sure everybody is aware. And I think making sure, not only that we're following the safest best practices based on our health and safety professionals and how they guide us,
Yeah.
but also, you know, making sure we're in line with what everybody expects. And it can be tricky when we sort of end up with some chemistries that we're not normally handling. And this is something that I'm starting to see where, I hope that we can have better engagement with the rest of the industry about, hey, what if we said, hey, let's kind of keep these out, or come up with an understanding of this is where we're going to draw a line to make sure that we don't wander into something we don't want to wander into.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's true. And I think a lot of times in the oil field, it's because we get driven so hard on, driving down costs and, sort of that mentality we often get caught up in. I say we as like just an industry is like historically we've got caught up in doing the easiest and the cheapest and the fastest way of doing things. But in the long run, is it worth the trade-off? It shouldn't be.
No, and we have to be consistent with our message, right? I think when I tell employees, I expect you to be safe, I expect you to come home safe, I expect you to stop somebody who's doing something unsafe, I want you to ask good questions. Um, and then someone asks a question about, hey, I'm concerned about this product on location, and it falls on deaf ears. Like, can they really feel supported if they see something wrong? And that's the part where I'm kind of trying to draw a line with the influence that I have is to say no, I want to be consistent with this because I do believe it, and I hope the rest of the industry does too.
Right.
So
Well, and I think it goes back to, I mean, obviously when there's a product on location, you have to have an SDS. You have to disclose anything that's in there, and so to your point is just anything on location that you're unfamiliar with, or even things you're familiar with, is just review it. If there's something new that comes on location, it's like, oh, this is the new XYZ product from whatever third party chemical company. It's gonna, drill better than we've ever had. Well, there may be a reason why it hasn't been on location before, and maybe there's a reason for it now just being tried for whatever. But again, just do your due diligence, especially if you're handling any of this stuff. And yeah, you could definitely save yourself there. If I was a clickbaity type person, I would say we need to have like a thumbnail or like the title of this episode's like, if you don't want babies, try this.
ooh,
And then yeah, but
it's pretty dark though.
I
It's
know,
pretty
right?
dark.
But it's like, sometimes you got to go hard on the clickbait stuff. And I'm just kidding. We obviously wouldn't do that. But in the world we live in, who knows? You might get a lot of people watching it and listening, and then all of a sudden it sparks another conversation. But I'm not into that game quite yet with AES, so I'm not going to go there. But anyway, you never know.
Give it time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we started off with Why Matt Hates series, so which was, could be arguably somewhat dark, but yeah, when it comes to of course, reproductive issues, it's a whole nother ball game. But the reality is there's a lot of chemicals out there. Make sure that if you're on location, you're handling things that you're unfamiliar with, know what it is and what kind of PPE you need. But at the end of the day, too, is like the cheesing, kind of going back to what we started, is
cheesing and greasing. There's they can put a dent in your day. And so hopefully by listening, you've got a better idea on why it happens and how to prevent it. Matt, any closing last words on that thought?
I mean, I think for the R&D people, which AAD conference was super flattering because I not only did I get to see a lot of old friends, but a number of them mentioned our podcast. Which is neat. Just you feel a little more connected to people. So thank you.
Yes.
Those of you that reached out or made me feel good for a minute.
Right.
We had a problem. A customer had a problem, and we were looking at a solution. And this wasn't actually a cheesing incident, but it was a problem in a particular area, and we were looking at ways to disperse something. And we tried a few things, and a lot of times you try whatever you got, whatever you think might work. And sure enough, we found a couple of things that worked. One of them came from our sister company. They do production chemicals. So it was a strong solvent with a low flash point. And another one was a pretty nasty surfactant. And they both worked the best. But so at first pass, you're in a rush, what have you. But we actually said, I'm not comfortable, nor do I think it would be appropriate to send this stuff out to the rig. Let's give it another round. And ultimately, we were able to, by rolling up our sleeves, I'm taking credit for where the lab rolled up their sleeves, and they dug deeper, and they were able to find a product that had a much better profile at a lower cost without any of those concerns. And I'm not saying it works out that way every time, but it works out many times. And so give it that second or third round, and you will probably find something that works just as well without some of these things we really don't want.
Yeah,
So-
no, that's a great example. And with that said, folks, if you have any other questions or thoughts, ideas for a show, reach out to us on LinkedIn, or you can send an email, good old email at theflowlinepodcast@aesfluids.com. Check out the website, and again, follow us on LinkedIn. The AES page keeps growing. We continue to put out great content. The YouTube channel has a bunch of good information on there if you want to continue on your education journey when it comes to mud. What else, Matt? Anything else that people need to be aware of?
Oh, boy. I don't know. I mean, we'll do an episode talking about our papers because we had some papers come out.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, hopefully if you follow us on LinkedIn, that's normally where we kind of blast everything that's going on. But there's a lot of exciting stuff in the works too. But I don't want to give it away yet. So-
Keep people on their toes, or on the edge of their seats, rather. But with that said, appreciate all the support as always. Take care for now, and most definitely be safe. Read your SDSs. Until next time.
Take care.
Thanks for listening. Please tune in next week for another exciting episode of The Flowline. And remember, may your returns always be full and your trips always smooth. Views expressed in this program belong to participants and not their employees. The program is for informational purposes only and cannot take the place of seeking professional advice. Copyright AES Drilling Fluids.